Hi, my name is Sarah Carter. I am a family rights advocate for North Carolina. I help families understand and work through child welfare cases, divorce custody cases, and I help them figure out, what are your rights, what can you do to help your case, have a personal involvement in your case, and ultimately, what can you do to seek the proper, outcome for your kids, the best interest, whether it applies to parental fitness or not. We always want to keep the best interests of our children at heart. So, part of the thing that I'm doing this video is about is because as an advocate, I'm often asked for assistance where in regards to complaints to the state, complaints on a federal lawsuit level, complaints guardian ad litem's, complaints to local departments of social services. I'm also asked to assist in learning how to represent yourself in court as a family, as a parent, sometimes intervening as a grandparent. Basically, those things, as well as Department of Social Services being involved prior to even any court involvement whatsoever. And so as an advocate, I always give this kind of a list and a rundown to parents and sometimes grandparents of things to collect and document as well as file in their own personal homes, so that the case can be alleviated much better. If you want to go to a new attorney and say, I need an attorney for my case, this kind of preparation is very important for families to prepare for, so that it's an easy consultation, or if you're going to an advocate for assistance, it's an easy assessment of the situation. This will also help families in general with record keeping, even if you don't assist in, or even if you're not doing DSS cases or divorce custody, it's a good preparation for in case that ever happens to you. Right now we have like 3/4 of the cases showing up in Department of Social Services are unsubstantiated. So, I mean, it's a dangerous number to get stuck in Department of Social Services cases or divorce custody cases. And you shouldn't be there in the first place with the DSS cases. So it's good to prepare. So I'm going to go over this list, and the first thing I want you guys to do if you're preparing is to make sure that you have enough office supplies. I'm always going through a bazillion office supplies in preparation. I did for my own case, as well as helping others prepare for theirs. So you want to get a good couple sturdy binders. Don't go for the cheap ones that fall apart easy, because these binders are just going to be used quite often. So you see I have mine here, some of them. I have quite a few of them there. And I always encourage parents and grandparents and everything to decorate your binders, because they become dreary. It becomes a dreary situation. And when you look at them, you don't want to think, oh my God, I have to get through this somehow. And I have to look at these things and, they're awful. But anyway, a couple things about when you put records and documents into these binders. You want to get some of those clear plastic cover slips, so that way you are not hole punching medical records, educational records, and court documentation. Anything else can really, or law enforcement documentation, those things you don't want to hole punch. You want to put those in like a little plastic binder. You can see I have mine, or cover sheet, and put those there. So that way when you use them as hard evidence, when you copy them or whatever, you don't have hole punches in the evidence. So that's a good way to, really document everything. So if we have a case that's in court, you have a case file at the clerk of courts, local clerk of courts. And when you're in your divorce custody case or your DSS case. And so you, as the parent, or your attorney, is allowed to access these files. The only two things that would prohibit somebody from accessing their file is if the records are sealed, which requires a judge's order to unseal them, or if you're gatekeepered, which means there's a judge's order prohibiting you access from your file. I never had my files sealed, but I was gatekeepered. So those would be the only two things stopping you. Otherwise, state statutes say that the parent does have the right to access that file. So say you're going to start collecting your documentation, and that's where you want to start. You would go to your clerk of courts, you would, and this is by no means any legal advice, but this is what I did as a self-representing parent. I went to my clerk of courts. I asked for a certified copy of my case file. Because I had filed as an indigent, which basically is poor person status, I could get my file for no cost or low cost. So that might be something you want to say is, if you did file as an indigent, you did get a court-appointed lawyer, you probably did file as an indigent. So, ask them if it was low cost, it can be low cost or no cost. So when you get your file home, that is something that you do want to keep together. You don't want to write on it. You might be tempted. Don't write on it. Don't put any sticky notes. Don't put anything on it. If you do want to write on them, I would suggest copying the entire thing and then tearing that apart or putting it in dates, in date order or whatever. But the hard copy, the certified copy, you do not want to modify. The reason being is because a certified copy is the truest copy at the time in the file. Now, I had worked with a family that did not actually have a petition against them, but they were in court. And they went and got their certified file. There was no petition in there. And it is not a good thing to do, to not have the petition, because you kind of need that. And later, the department stuck a petition in there. So with that certified copy, this parent could prove that there was no petition up until a certain point, and that the department had fraudulently put one in later. So I always suggest that families go do certified copies of their case file before a hearing and after a hearing. That way you can see what's going on. All right, so we have the certified copy of your case file. See what else I got here on my checklist. I do have a checklist. It is online, and under this video I will post the link to the checklist so you can look it over and print it off if you want. It's a really good thing to hole punch and put in your binder, so that way you know you've got what you need. So we talked about the certified copy of the case file. Don't forget to take your ID when you go. Court transcripts are a good thing to have. If you can get those, they usually cost. Sometimes you have to fill out a form to do that. It might require money. Any documentation to support a UCCJEA, Domestic Violence or Indian Child Welfare Act action, or prior custody orders. Those are important to have. Those you would want to not hole punch. All documentation received by your local Department of Social Services, such as letters or emails. Make sure to attach the envelope to the back of your mail documentation so you can show the information was delivered to you on a certain day or time, as the letter can state a date different than the date you actually get the letter. You can go ahead and also, in written requests, give the department notice that you would like only your mail to come to you certified as well. Sometimes the local Department of Social Services in North Carolina at the front desk have a file stamp received that they can put on documentation. So if you ever connect with them through letters or anything like that, you can ask them to please file stamp that as received. So then you have a copy for yourself for court, and then you have, of course, a copy of the letter that they're receiving. All right. If you purchase items for your children while they're in the legal custody of your local Department of Social Services, or unlegal custody, unlawful, illegal, keep all the receipts. This is especially important if they pursue child support from you or say that you purchase things for them to meet their needs, to negate the need to terminate parental rights based on not paying them money. So the point is, if Department of Social Services has your children, then and you're taking things to visitations and providing for them, food, clothing, whatever, that you have proof of that. This is important too, because when they come home, you want their belongings to come with. And how can you say, I bought my kid a brand new bike, my child's coming home in a week, but nobody's mentioned anything about her bike or something. So keep your receipts. When they're initially taken, such as in my circumstance, my children were taken with quite a few of their belongings. And so I eventually wrote those down and had a social worker sign that those things were taken, so that way they would also be returned one day when my children do come home. So let's see. If you're dropping something off at Department of Social Services for your children, that's also an excellent time to utilize that file stamp received and a letter stating that these are the things that you're dropping off. Let's see here. Okay, so a lot of times in DSS cases or sometimes in divorce custody cases, law enforcement is called. So part of the thing that would help out an attorney or a family rights advocate or you representing yourself are going to be your law enforcement involvement documentation. Now there's a couple things that you can look for in that. You want 911 call logs. Some counties do actually delete these after 30 days. So you want to get them as soon as possible. Any police reports made. Check county and city if county and city are both involved or just one or the other because they're going to have different record departments. Any warrants issued. Those are seriously important. Certified copies of any case files associated with this case, such as divorce custody cases or any other criminal cases associated with this case. Sometimes records involving juveniles, they'll say, we can't give those records because it involves juveniles, but you can tell them that they can mark the names of the juveniles out in order to give you the records. The next biggest thing that we're kind of looking for as, or should be as attorneys or family advocates, such as myself, is proof of your ability to provide the basic needs of your children at the time of seizure. Here in North Carolina, appeals courts like to look at the parent, look at if the parent could provide the basic needs or if couldn't. Made a substantial change regarding the welfare of the children, and obtain the basic needs in the duration of the case. So could you provide parental fitness to your children before the seizure, during the seizure, and after the seizure? Society does say you have to provide the basics in order to properly care for your child. It's part of parental fitness. There's actually a doctrine surrounding that. Some ideas, but not limited to, are proof of housing, houses deemed safe to live in, utilities, able to provide clothes, entertainment, hygienic items, food, proper sleeping arrangements, medical attention for your children, familial affection, substantial relationship between you and your children. Proof of income or support doesn't necessarily have to be a job as long as you can take care of the financial needs of your children. Transportation doesn't mean you have to own a vehicle, but you need to have proof of access to transportation. Records of all this proof. And if you can get medical records from the hospital for your children, that's a good thing. Also, educational records. Now, educational records is kind of cool because it is protected by a federal law called FERPA. And even if your child is in DSS custody, you have access to both your medical records and your child's educational records as long as there is no judge's order prohibiting those specifically. Text messages. If you and your social worker are texting back and forth, I highly recommend that you get an app on your phone that converts those to an email format so that you can print those off. Photos that you can copy that are dated and show evidence of things in a clear fashion, okay? Like if your child comes to visitation with a huge bruise on his arm and you take a picture close up of the bruise and farther away of the bruise so that it can be identified as belonging to him. Because, if you show a piece of somebody's arm with a bruise on it, you just don't necessarily know if that's the child, when it was taken, that sort of circumstance. So photos are important. You also want to get your copies done in a few copies. I'm going to say that because if you're self-representing or if you're putting things together for an attorney, if there are two parents involved, you want a copy for each parent's attorney, or each party, basically. You got the DSS attorney, you have the guardian ad litem attorney, you have the court, you have a copy for yourself, and then I suggest a lot of times an extra copy for appeals court, so that things go a lot more smoothly. So, you're going to want a few copies of everything. Sometimes if you're preparing a documentation or whatever as a self-representing parent, And you have those copies, and you can just flip through and just build documents real super easy if you have proper basis for doing that. So, all right, what else do we have here? Recorded phone calls. We can't really take cameras and things like that into court knowingly. I mean, we're not supposed to. So any phone calls that you are recording, you can actually get an app on the phone that I have one myself that records all your phone conversations, and you can delete it or whatever. But they do need to be transcribed. You end up losing your phone with all your evidence and everything on it. That's not good. So get your evidence off your phone ASAP. But transcribe your phone calls if they're very important, so that you can introduce a paper trail. Here's what you want at the beginning of your binder. Okay, you need a timeline of events, communication, appointments, court dates, and general actions taken. When were visitations, shared parenting meetings, community family team meetings, child planning conferences, mediation meetings held. This timeline is super important because with court cases, generally, they have statutory mandates about when they should happen, and it really benefits the children to have them done in a very precise, sort of consistent manner. So in order to avoid a lot of continuations and things like that, you want to get your timeline down. Attorneys help understand it better. Family rights advocates help understand it better when you do a timeline instead of like a 3-hour story of what's going on. We want to hear what is going on. We want to know what's going on. But if you're writing it down and we can see it in order, it helps us a lot better to understand what's going on. A contacts list. This is super important as well, especially for self-representing families. You want to, in your timeline, when you're putting your timeline together, you want to put down all the names of everybody that's been involved. So witnesses, social workers, contact information, law enforcement, who is who, what's their address, their mailing address, who's their attorney, what's their address, what's phone numbers for everybody. That's super important. You know, who's your judge? Who was it on that day? What's your attorney's contact information? Phone, email, whatever. Well, what do they prefer you to communicate with them through? These are super important to know because once you have an attorney, they're going to have to reach out and figure all that out. It makes things actually quicker for them to have the list. If you're self-representing, it's way super easy to, you know, say, here's my contacts. If you have to form a complaint and send it out, that makes it a lot easier too. So you call it your party list. These are all the parties involved. So witnesses are good, teachers are good, medical, doctor, anybody involved, you kind of need to write a list of. All right, what else do we got? Okay, this is kind of like the courtish request, but each county in North Carolina, some counties are actually smushed together with this, but generally have local district court rules, and you can generally find them online. If you're a self-representing family or you're not and you want to learn the system a little bit better, I really encourage families to print off their local district court rules. There's some interesting things in there, like some counties are required to have a child planning conference prior to seizure of children, as long as it's not emergency circumstance. Some counties don't have that. Some counties say that court-appointed attorneys for DSS have to have specific training outlined in those district court rules. And so, I mean, you can kind of look over that and see what your attorney is supposed to be learning or applying to your case. As a self-representing parent, you can see that whatever you're taking in action in court is abiding by those local district court rules, because we don't want to be stepping on judges' toes and everything like that when they're the ones who put these local rules together to apply to that specific area. Anything else that you might want to put into these binders that you think is relevant? I mean, here's one of mine. It's got court documentation, case file in it, medical records. Another thing that you might want to get is if you've had a court-appointed attorney and the attorney or a private attorney and the attorney is no longer working for the case, you may want to ask that attorney in a letter, something documented, or an email, if you could please have your client-attorney case file. A client-attorney case file is all the documentation that the attorney has gathered together to work on the case, and that is yours as a client when you are done. Now, the only thing that would stop you is if you have a court order stating that the attorney does not have to give you the file. Otherwise, they should. So, checklist will be noted at the bottom of this video. Hopefully, if you have any questions or anything, comment below or email parentsagainstloss@gmail.com with your questions. Make sure you have those binders, markers, stapler, tape, clear cover sheets, and get that put together. It's seriously important. I mean, can you imagine if you had a class action lawsuit and an attorney shows up and everybody shows up with like 5 boxes of their documentation? It just wouldn't be very productive in a way to try to reach out for help in an individual or collective group if we're not prepared beforehand. So I think it'd be awesome to have a bunch of parents get together with everything properly filed and then go together and then talk about things like, conflict of interest or commonality or things like that in their cases. But it requires a little bit of preparation beforehand. And those are my lovely children in the back. I have to show you. All right, so comments, questions, feel free to comment below or email me, Sarah Carter, Parents Against Loss, parental family rights advocate for North Carolina.